Good evening. Good evening, everybody. If you would take your seats, that'd be great. So we want to get started with our program. It's so nice to see so many of my friends here. Having been on the board of the World Affairs Council for several years, it's really great to see so many people who are such big supporters of the Council. I'm Diane Smith. I'll be the Master of Ceremonies for the evening. In my daytime job, I am an anchor and the senior producer for program development at CTN. For anybody who's not familiar with CTN, we're sort of the Connecticut version of C-SPAN. It's all government affairs all the time. In fact, I'm so happy to be able to escape and be here tonight because tonight is the close of the legislative session, or as we say here in Connecticut, and this is how we say it here in Connecticut, sine die. So God knows what's happening over there because they have had about 100 bills stacked up when I left at 5 o'clock, and they have to be finished at midnight. Anyway, I want to welcome all of you to the 2014 Luminary Dinner. Each year, the World Affairs Council of Connecticut celebrates the contribution of a recognized international leader or an organization that's made a profound impact on the betterment of the world, a true global luminary. So let's not forget that the World Affairs Council of Connecticut was established in 1924. So we're celebrating 90 years of connecting you to the world this year. 90 years, wow. Because I'm seeing a number of familiar faces here, I know that many of you will recall that we have had some really terrific programs over the last few years and recipients of the Luminary Award, United Technologies' Harry Gray, ESPN International, and Save the Children. We've also had many amazing keynote speakers, Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, General Shinseki, General Alexander Haig, the former Secretary of State, and of course, Dr. Henry Kissinger, who I think surprised some of us with his candor, his humor, and I wasn't aware of his deep, deep love of the Yankees, but yeah. Last year, you'll probably remember we honored Sikorsky Aircraft for its contribution to Connecticut's history of innovation and the global economy. Well, this year is also a wonderful year, as tonight we are honoring AmeriCares for its efforts as a nonprofit global health and disaster relief organization. AmeriCares is known for its ability to improve health outcomes in communities affected by disaster and in those with limited resources in more than 90 countries every year, 90 every year. I've been a big supporter of AmeriCares over the years, for decades actually, and I would say that the organization helped shape my view of the world through some of the relief missions that I accompanied them on. So for that reason, and as a former board member of the World Affairs Council, I'm really delighted to be here with you this evening. It's an exciting evening that we have ahead, including the Global Legacy Award, which we're very proud to be giving to Edward Stockton, and one of our most steadfast members and really a pillar of this organization, and the Student Global Engagement Award, which is going to Nicholas Karangekis. But first, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to the president of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut, Mr. Jay Bruns. Jay is Vice President for Public Policy at the Hartford Financial Services Group, a position he has held since 2004. Prior to joining the Hartford, Jay had a long career as a U.S. diplomat, and I'm really proud to have served on the board of directors with Jay. So please welcome Jay Bruns.
Thank you, Diane, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. I'm honored to be the president of the board of directors of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut, a wonderful, small organization that brings the world to Hartford. This year, the World Affairs Council of Connecticut celebrates our 90th year. So for nearly a century, our council has helped Connecticut citizens understand the critical international issues of the day. Thanks to you, the determined engagement of my fellow board members, and to our amazing staff, we can continue the tradition of our predecessors. Year in and year out, our council offers interesting and informative programming to our community. We have hosted over 30 programs in the past year alone. For example, we heard from the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, as well as from a senior Israeli official about the Arab-Israeli conflict. We heard from the Canadian ambassador to Iran during the hostage crisis. He described what unfolded when his staff helped spare a lucky group of American diplomats in Tehran from being taken as hostage. This story was popularized by last year's Oscar-winning movie Argo. Through other program, we learned about international cyber threats, the sad reality of human trafficking, about how the U.S. Treasury Department combats terrorism, and what it's like to be the top career lawyer in the State Department and the National Security Council, and much more. In the next month, we'll welcome the chief economist from Latin America's largest bank and the Italian ambassador to the United States. In addition to this programming, our council has a mandate to help educate Connecticut students on global issues. We accomplish this through the Model UN, a program that we've hosted since 1952. Amazing that we've been hosting the Model United Nations for 62 years. We're enjoying explosive growth in the program in recent years. For example, in 2013, we invited over 700 students from 33 area high schools to New York for a day of meetings in the United Nations. These future leaders then spent a weekend on the University of Hartford campus representing their chosen country's foreign policy positions in a process that replicates the United Nations. The Council is highlighting the engagement of our Connecticut students in international affairs through our Global Engagement Award, about which you'll hear next. Through this programming, our Council brings great value to the community. We would not be able to do it without your help. In that regard, I want to express my heartfelt thanks to our board members. Can you please stand up? Our board is unstinting in its generosity and continuous flow of good ideas to help the council perform. You've offered invaluable service through identifying speakers and sponsors, helping improve our governance structure, and helping out with finance, accounting, marketing, and real estate issues. And through your personal generosity, our outstanding board helps our organization succeed. I thank each of you for your thoughtful and generous contribution to our mission. I'm very pleased that we'll honor one of our long-standing members tonight for exceptional service. Next, I'd like to acknowledge our staff, Eve Peck, Emily Esposito, and our Executive Director, Megan Torrey. Can the three of you please stand up? I am still mystified that with only 3 people, our staff can consistently deliver the high level of programming I just described, including tonight's Luminary dinner. Eve, Emily, and Megan, I speak for the entire board when I say thank you. Finally, and very importantly, I want to thank all of our generous sponsors. Without your contributions, we could not carry out our mission. We are truly grateful for your generosity, and especially the generosity again this year of our lead sponsor, United Technologies. I'd also like to offer a special thanks to Dr. Murray and Ambassador Ford for being with us tonight. The Luminary Award dinner is an annual highlight for us. Once a year, we honor a person or organization that has made a positive contribution to world affairs. I'm pleased tonight that we will honor Connecticut-based AmeriCares for its exceptional humanitarian work over the past 4 decades. As a former career, As a former career diplomat, I feel passionate about, and I know the value of, a citizenry that is well informed on international issues. It's therefore personally rewarding to be involved with the Council. I'm grateful that you have all come here tonight to help us support our mission, and I hope to see you and your friends at upcoming events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. Someone was saying that the visit with the Italian ambassador will also include wine. With all the Italians in Connecticut and all the people that have traveled to Italy, that's going to be big. You better have a big room for that. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a woman who is not new to the World Affairs Council of Connecticut. She joined the organization in 2003 as the program director and has recently and very deservedly been appointed the executive director. Ladies and gentlemen, Megan Clark-Torrey.
Thank you, Diane. Wow, so this is what the room looks like from this side of the podium. So after so many years of being on the other side. It is a privilege to be here tonight in such prestigious company. Ed and Marilyn Stockton, Dr. Murray, Ambassador Ford, and of course, AmeriCares, an organization that does so much for the world, but is just in our backyard. I want to thank the Board of Directors and the Executive Committee of the World Affairs Council for appointing me Executive Director earlier this year. It is truly an honor to lead this organization, especially as we celebrate 90 years of connecting our community to the world and its most critical issues. I want to thank Jay Bruns for his leadership of this organization and all that he's done over the last years. And I want to add a very special thank you to the two co-chairs of tonight's event. This year was really a team effort, and everyone pulled together to make this night happen. But I want to thank our Chair Emeritus Peter Kelly, and Mr. Chuck Regan. I want to thank our WAC team, Eve and Emily. We're small, but we're really mighty. And thank you to all the interns and volunteers that made tonight happen. And once again, thank you to all of you for being here to support us. As Jay mentioned, some of the most important and fulfilling work that we do at the Council is the work we do in education. We take the job of educating the next generation of future leaders very seriously. Throughout the year, the Council works to call attention to the importance of global education by sitting on several professional education committees, by advocating for global competence at the State Department of Education, and by offering professional development workshops for Connecticut educators. And of course, we have our Keystone program, the Model United Nations. As you heard Jay said, we've been doing this program since 1952. If you can imagine the thousands and thousands of students who participated in that program and how that program has affected and impacted their worldview. We recognize that today our students not only compete locally, on a state level or on a national level, but they truly compete globally. That is why, for the first time, we're recognizing a student with our Global Engagement Award. We wanted to highlight the incredible work students are doing in their communities to be an active part of the world. Global competence is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Globalization is driving demand for an internationally competent workforce. 1 in 5 jobs is tied to international trade, and 4 million Americans are employed by foreign businesses, including some of you in this room tonight. To be globally competitive, Americans must be globally competent. So tonight, we are honoring Nicholas Karangekis, a senior from Suffield High School, with our first Global Engagement Award. It was in his teacher, Larry Kutulka's International Studies class, that Nick and his fellow students first learned about the nature of modern-day slavery and the horrors of human trafficking. Nick became determined to make an impact on this issue. He created a presentation to raise public awareness and a financial campaign to help contribute to rescuing those in bondage. And he chose the organization Free the Slaves to donate to. He then set out on his own to spread the word about human trafficking and modern-day slavery. Nick spoke to other classes in school, then to faith groups around town, and then he reached out to schools and organizations outside of his community. Through this process, he continued his research and updated his presentation to reflect new developments he was discovering. Donations started to come in. Soon, Nick was in direct contact with the regional office of Free the Slaves about how the money he raised would be directed around the world. Nick's efforts were being recognized far beyond his own community. Because of his commitment to raising awareness on a global issue, he has helped not only to spread the word, but has directly impacted the lives of victims of slavery and human trafficking all over the world. Nicholas demonstrates the knowledge and skills inherent in global competence, particularly the ability to investigate the world, to communicate ideas, and to take action. The World Affairs Council also wants to draw attention to the impact educators have on students as mentors and as leaders. And we want to recognize Larry Katulka, who nominated Nicholas for this award. He wrote in his nomination that when students take their experiences from the classroom to the outside world, they should be applauded and recognized for their efforts. And Larry, we agree. When students are globally engaged, all of our futures are brighter. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nicholas Karangekis and Lawrence Katulka.
Thank you, Megan, and again, our best to Nicholas. What a great project he's been involved with. So now we're going to take a little break from the program because the Kellys have arrived, so it's okay to start dinner. And while you're enjoying your dinner, we're also going to hope that you enjoy a video of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut in honor of its 90th anniversary.
The World Affairs Council of Hartford is the third oldest membership organization of its type in the United States. It was started in 1924 as a forum for discussion of international issues by a group of Hartford educators and business people. It was formally recognized as a chapter of the Foreign Policy Association in 1926. At the 1967 annual meeting, the organization changed its name to the World Affairs Center because the program encompassed more than just foreign policy, and the organization was no longer linked to the Foreign Policy Association's parent organization in New York. Since then, the organization has changed its name to the World Affairs Council and has enjoyed growth and professionalism. The history of the World Affairs Council, with all of its name changes, location changes, and ups and downs, is that of a constantly evolving organization responding to members' interests and outside conditions. Many things have remained constant. The Council has always enjoyed close relationships with area colleagues and corporations, and has always done a great deal with a small budget. The Council's programming is now more diverse than ever, with more on Asia, the Pacific Rim, Africa, and Latin America with interests in politics, business, and cultures. What started in 1924 as a series of discussions amongst Harvard educators and business people has become one of Harvard's most valuable institutions.
Good evening again, everybody. Good evening. I hope everybody enjoyed their dinner. We're going to continue with the program now, if everyone is ready. I'm going to continue with the program by introducing two officers of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut, two people that I had the pleasure of serving on the board with, Leslie Robertson and Donna Collins. So if you would please come up here. And you're going to give the Global Legacy Award. Okay, wonderful.
Oh, there you are.
Microphone's okay? Good evening, everyone. My name is Leslie Robertson, and it's an honor to be here with you for this very special occasion. As you will have read from your program this evening, Mr. Ed Stockton, our 2014 Global Legacy Award honoree, has enjoyed a long and illustrious career, and an influential career too. I will take just a couple of moments to recap part of that career, and then I'll share with you a couple of my own personal thoughts on this terrific fellow and my friend, Ed Stockton. Donna Collins will then step up here and do just the same. Ed has made very significant contributions to our community in so many ways and has dedicated significant time and energy to the World Affairs Council over many years. After receiving his BA from Ohio State University and his master's from the University of Connecticut, he served as a U.S. Air Force captain in the Korean War. Subsequently, Ed worked for United Technologies for 13 years as an economist. He was also mayor of the town of Bloomfield for 5 years, from 1969 to 1974. And then, in 1975, Governor El Agrasso appointed Ed Commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development for the state of Connecticut. On a personal level, I've had the pleasure and privilege of knowing Ed for 20 years, working with him on trade association boards and panels, and most importantly, here with the World Affairs Council of Connecticut. Ed is a true gentleman. He has a quiet determination and a wonderfully kind spirit, and he has a presence that inspires those around him. Ed motivates and energizes us, and he does it all with such enthusiasm and such grace. Ed is also a fellow who possesses that rare quality to be able to bring people together in a patient way, thus encouraging us to coalesce our often varied and differing ideas and help us achieve the best outcomes for sometimes difficult issues. Ed's enthusiasm engages us, and he always leads by example. I have come across many people over the years who can talk an awful lot, but manage to say very little at all. Perhaps some of you have encountered such people too. I dare say you probably have. However, with Ed Stockton, the exact opposite is true. And let me give you just one example. During our executive committees and our board meetings, Ed is rarely the first member to speak, preferring instead to listen carefully to the views and opinions of his fellow board members, which he values highly. But when Ed does weigh in and speak, let me tell you, you listen. You listen, you learn, and you are wisely guided by his wisdom and experience, and by his passion and his knowledge. It has been a true pleasure to work with you, Ed, and I look forward to much more of the same. And finally, Ed, congratulations to you on this most richly deserved award. Thank you.
So you can read all the accomplishments about Ed and his contribution to the state and his success as Commissioner of Economic Development. It's in your program, and we hope that you do take the time because there's a lot to learn about Ed. One of the things that really struck me in reading his bio and knowing his achievements is the fact that when he was the chief economic driver of the state of Connecticut, under his watch, he was credited for having created over 200,000 jobs in Connecticut. And he cut in half the unemployment rate. Ed, where are you now? So Ed has led several economic missions during the course of his career. In 1980, he led 24 Connecticut CEOs to the very first state-sponsored trade mission in China. And that was an interesting task, for sure. A few years later, Ed and his wife, Marilyn, led the Friendship Force delegation to China. And I had the wonderful luck of the draw and was part of that trip. And that experience forever changed me. We traveled inside China. This is 1983. We were going inside China to explore the history, observe the humanity, and climb the Great Wall with a Channel 3 news crew in tow. So getting the evening news report out of China was another experience altogether. Nonetheless, we sent back news reports almost every night on the mission, and the purpose was really to create friendship and understanding, and I think Ed and Marilyn were so perfect to be guiding us on that trip because that really is the essence of who they are. And Ed, with his soft style and diplomatic ways, warmed the crowds and stimulated friendship amongst the group. And many of us continue to stay in touch. As a matter of fact, periodically we have China reunions at Ed and Marilyn's home in Bloomfield, where we get together and look at photos and reminisce about memories. And once again, that truly is one of Ed's wonderful of the many achievements and attributes is the bringing together of people. So we really love that. Many of us are here tonight. We've been hanging around for a long time, and many Chinese dinners at the Stockton's home. That's something that I really treasure. So Ed's long-term commitment to the World Affairs Council, as Leslie said, has had a huge impact on the vitality and the viability of our organization. Whether he's introducing new people to the council, promoting people to come to an event, a program, a meeting, or advocating our mission, Ed walks the walk. His frequent checking-in visits to the office provide Megan and Emily and Eve great inspiration and really lighten up their day. And Ed, after this event, they want to make sure that you'll still be popping in. And recently, during our board strategic planning sessions, Ed was very passionate about our need to launch an endowment program to ensure the future of the organization. And as we continued to do our planning, Ed went off and secured our very first gift. And that's now a legacy. One of the things that I know for sure is that if Ed Stockton is your friend, you have a friend for life. The only thing that could be better would be to have Ed as a mentor. And I have had the double blessing of that. For over 30 years, Ed has been my friend and my mentor, and I thank you so very much. And Leslie and I, and on behalf of the board, are extremely honored to present to you the first Global Legacy Award to Ed Stockton.
Holy smoly. Woo! Holy moly. Let me say thank you very much for all of that, and all the people who have come here, which include my dear wife of 62 years, and even more shocking is my business partner for 33 years, and we're still married. But, and then of course our son, who packed up his bags and, with his PhD from Yale in economics and went down to the Federal Reserve and worked for 30 years. Oh my God, he used 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and of course rose to the top naturally, but done an incredible job. But down to the World Affairs Council, you've got to realize how crucially important this is. I have watched the Connecticut economy in the private sector. I was corporate economist for UTC for 13 years, commissioner of economic development for 6.5, et cetera, another 30 years in our own business. But the fact of the matter is, I look at all the facts and figures about the Connecticut economy, and I realize that the one area this state has got to go after vigorously, the international economy. And that is a two-part thing. One, bring companies in from overseas, which is a crucial part of Greater Hartford, and helping small and medium-sized companies export their products. Now, Pratt & Whitney and the UTC, I mean, our good friend, Mr. Wilson, he's selling all his engines all over the place, and he can barely keep them from being snatched away. So, but some of these small and medium-sized companies, very honestly, they don't understand, they don't have contacts, they need help for us to. We went to a trade mission in Saudi Arabia, of all places, and there was one American company, our company, and the only other Italy had 99 companies. And I said, we were flying back to Zurich, and I happened to sit next to some kid from Italy, and I said, well, why is that? He said, well, our government, they pay the fees for the booth that you have, and of course we're paying $8,000 for a booth, and they also pay 1/2 of their hotel and food bills. So they do a major promotion. But, we have got to get out and sell our stuff. I mean, I swear to God, all over the world. And I think the time has come. And you look at these wonderful companies in Greater Hartford. You take Trump America, you take Konica, you take all these major companies that are big employers, came from overseas. They just float in on a thing. And the guy from, I'll never forget, from Honda, he came, his arms and legs were about that big around, And we're out on the second day of January. It is colder than I have ever been in my entire life. And we're walking across a cornfield, and I'm scared to death the guy's going to fall over the corn cob. But the fact of the matter is, let's face it, we romanced him, and he was going to go to Massachusetts. He had a location up near the Mass Pike, and so he came to Connecticut. And, they also have several hundred people that are employed there by. So the fact of the matter is, we have got to get out, and that takes me to the Hartford Council and what you have contributed. And many, many times, this organization is committed to things that made a crucial difference between a company coming here or not coming here. And I think that's the kind of thing that we've got to continue. And but I say, there are two areas where they can be helpful. That is bringing new companies in. We had a German manufacturer, and they were going to North Carolina. Why? Because the chairman's best friend had just established a facility in North Carolina. And he came here, and his first words to me is, "I sink into my knees up to here." Oh, I thought, oh. So I said, the governor wants to talk to you, and she would love to have you drop by the residence for a drink. Oh, okay. So we went for a drink, and then the governor unfortunately said, "Would you like another?" And he said, "Yeah, I'd like another." Oh my gosh. So then we would go to dinner, and we had to drink 2 bottles of red wine. But nevertheless, these are the kind of things, you establish relationships, and this organization has done more than any other in terms of establishing relationships with overseas companies who are either going to move here or going to buy other products. So, I think that the two things that have happened that just make me so happy I can't stand it, and that is the executive committee of this organization went out and hunted all over the country to find an executive director, and by God, they found the executive director right under their nose, who has done an incredible job, who has been so incredible and done an incredible job. And Megan right there, I mean, she looks like a young girl, and she is, but my God, what they produce, and I might say that Emily and Eve are the same. What this staff produces, you cannot believe, compared to any staff I know, and I know 5 or 6 organizations that are similar to this one, but they are incredible. So I think what we've, the other thing, of course, is the endowment fund, and that's to back up the budget that we have, because we cannot allow this to, sort of wilt on the vine. We have got to move forward. So I am so happy to say tonight, this organization is going up, 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 and I'll predict to you a year from tonight, we are going to be in such a much better position and contributing so much more as a result of Megan's coming on as executive director and of the endowment fund. And so I'm telling you, please all come back next year to see the end result of what does happen, because it is going to be exciting and something crucially important to the state of Connecticut. And I thank you very, very much for this great honor. I've met at least 50 people here who deserve it more than I, but I accept it nevertheless. Thank you.
So we have a presentation as well. Ed, actually, we have two gifts for you, if you, yeah. So we know how much you love World Affairs Council and the world, so we have a beautiful crystal gift with the globe in the center, and it says World Affairs Council Global Legacy Award 2014, Edward J. Stockton.
Thank you so much. Oh, my God.
That's for you.
Woo. Thank you.
And the General Assembly sent over a beautiful citation at about 4 o'clock. You know they've been busy today. About 4 o'clock today they sent it, and Leslie would like to read it to you.
General Assembly official citation introduced by Representative David Barham, Senator Beth Bayh, and Senator Eric Coleman. Be it hereby known to all that the Connecticut General Assembly hereby offers its sincerest congratulations to Edward J. Stockton in recognition of being honored by the World Affairs Council of Connecticut as recipient of its prestigious Global Legacy Award for service to our state as Commissioner for the Department of Economic and Community Development and as a consultant for economic development traveling the world to promote economic development in Connecticut. We also acknowledge your past service as Mayor of Bloomfield, during which time you presided over the coveted All-American City Award for efforts in integration and community access. Our gratitude for your public service and commitment to our state. The entire membership extends its very best wishes on this memorable occasion and expresses the hope for continued success, given this 7th day of May, 2014, at the state capitol of Hartford.
We're keeping our bank account at Bank of America.
After hearing Ed's record as the Commissioner of Economic Development, I'd like to nominate him for a second term. Can I get a second, please? Ed, it's such a pleasure to know you and to have an opportunity to honor you tonight. And now on to the Luminary Award. But before this most distinguished award is presented, we'd like to share a video that showcases AmeriCares' incredible efforts as the world's leading provider of donated medicines and medical supplies throughout the world. Let's take a look.
Normal, nosotros levantamos por los hijos. Y uno pues sí, cuando no tiene, pero uno siempre se rebusca a ver de qué forma va, para ver de qué atención.
When Jose and Glenda heard that AmeriCares had a clinic in El Salvador, they brought Mariela. She had a serious respiratory infection. Left untreated, it could have advanced to pneumonia and been fatal. Since that first visit 6 years ago, AmeriCares has been keeping Mariela and her family healthy.
Pues el trato hacia nuestra hija de parte de la doctora Gutiérrez ha sido muy excelente y entonces yo con él me siento agradecido y le doy gracias a Dios porque pude encontrar a AmeriCares de que nos diera ese apoyo que nosotros necesitábamos. Y pues con él les agradecemos por todo eso y muchas gracias.
This is what we do. Every day, for over 30 years. And it's all because of you. You screened 700 people for diabetes in one weekend in Peru. You built a hospital wing for new mothers in Sri Lanka. You filled prescriptions for the uninsured in all 50 states. You delivered emergency supplies to victims of Hurricane Sandy. You helped Mariela see her 7th birthday. Together, we are helping people all over the world live longer, healthier lives. This is our mission. Thank you for making it yours.
That was Tony Goldwyn narrating, who's now playing the president on Scandal, in case you didn't recognize the voice. I can attest to the power of this organization as a Connecticut TV journalist. I traveled with AmeriCares on numerous missions at the time that the Soviet Union was coming apart. These were coveted assignments for local reporters and for national reporters who went along. I assure you it was not for the luxury of the travel. Imagine spending 12 hours in an unheated cargo plane with no lavatory, and if there weren't enough seats, you could actually spread out on top of the boxes of meds that were being delivered and try to catch a little shut-eye, if you weren't too cold. I mentioned that these trips colored my view of the world by giving me an up-close, bird's-eye view of the people in power and the people without power, but with a passion for freedom. I will never forget our meeting in the offices of Vytautas Landsbergis in March of 1990. He headed the parliamentary session during which the restoration of Lithuanian independence from the Soviet Union was declared, making Lithuania the first Soviet republic to do so. With armed militia all around us, in his office, and the entire building sandbagged, he brought us into his office, thanked us for bringing the medications and the doctors that came along, and then played a melody on his piano. He is a world-famous pianist. When the Soviet blockade failed to stop the Lithuanian people from seceding, they rolled in tanks and literally rolled over protesters. I'll never forget the visit to the hospital and one young woman who had tank tracks across her torso. Later that same year, we went to Zagreb in Croatia. One indelible memory from there, a woman who invited us inside her apartment to show us her daughter's sleeping cabinet embedded with bullets that had ripped out the living room windows. And today, as I listen to the developments in Ukraine, I'm reminded of the medical mission that took us to a hospital not far from Chernobyl 1 year after the nuclear accident. I can never forget the reactions and the faces of the doctors who traveled on this mission, some of the most highly qualified physicians in our country, doctors from Johns Hopkins. When they saw the reactor workers who were still hospitalized a year later, they were being treated with nothing more than herbal remedies, and they were horrified. As were we all when we saw people planting their vegetable gardens in places that we knew were very likely contaminated by the nuclear explosion. These trips changed my life and have made me a steadfast supporter of the great work of AmeriCares. They are the first boots on the ground when disaster happens, when political rest turns people against each other. They're the first ones in with help. So I'd now like to ask Megan and Jay to join me on stage to present the Luminary Award. Ladies and gentlemen, here this evening to accept the award from AmeriCares is their president and CEO, Michael Ninehouse.
Thank you, Diane. After that, I'm not sure I need to say anything. But thank you, and Jay and the board, we thank you as well, and Megan and the staff. And for all of you at the World Affairs Council, we thank you for this Luminary Award. It means a lot to us to be recognized in our own home state, even as we travel around the world to deal with people in crisis. Mariela, the girl from El Salvador who you met in the video, is just one of the millions of people that we have touched over the past 32 years. The medicines used to treat her are just a tiny part of the $11 billion in aid that we've provided around the world. AmeriCares is a disaster relief and global health organization. We save lives and we improve health for people who are in crisis because of disaster and poverty. We can do this because of three key strengths that we have as an organization. First, we are the #1 provider of donated medicines and medical supplies, We do that through partnerships with the U.S. pharmaceutical industry that donate, in this past year, $500 million worth of products to us. Those products are processed through our distribution center in Stamford, right here in Connecticut, and sent around the world to deal with people who are in crisis, in health crisis. We have an unrivaled partnership of more than 3,500 hospitals, clinics, and health centers around the world that we serve, and also in 50 states here in the United States. These trusted local partners are the ones on the ground who know what the health needs are, and they give us a great platform to reach people in crisis. And third, we're known for our responsiveness and our efficiency. For every dollar that's provided to us, we can provide $20 worth of aid to people in need. 97% of our donated resources go directly into our programs. AmeriCares works in 3 different ways. Through emergency response, which is probably how we're best known. And just a couple of examples from that. 6 months ago tomorrow, actually, Typhoon Haiyan went through the Philippines. 150-mile-per-hour winds, 15-foot storm surges, 6,000 dead, 1.8 million people displaced. Among other work, we have provided enough medicines in the Philippines post-disaster to fill 1 million prescriptions for people. In addition to that, we are rebuilding 57 damaged health clinics. These are clinics that serve about 1.3 million people who would not have access to health care again until that health systems are restored. And second example is the recent disaster here in our own country, the tornadoes and the floods in the South. 2 weeks ago, they ripped through a number of states. We've delivered more than $300,000 worth of tetanus vaccine, insulin, and other critical medicines to people who are affected by those storms. The second area of work for us is public health programming. And in this, we first improve access to medicines. Last year, we made 5,000 shipments of medicines from Stamford, our distribution center, to fill 14 million prescriptions around the world and in our 50 states here in our country. Secondly, we do disease intervention projects around things like chronic disease, which is now becoming the fastest growing burden of disease among people living in poverty around the world. And we conduct maternal and child health programs that target the most vulnerable people on our planet. Our third area of work are the model clinics that we run ourselves. One of them is in El Salvador that treated Mariella, who you met. We also have 5 mobile medical vans that provide service in the slums of Mumbai, India. And here in Connecticut, we have 4 free clinics in Danbury, Norwalk, Bridgeport, and Stamford. And those free clinics provide care to uninsured and underinsured people who would not have access to health care without us. Those are done in partnership with local hospitals and with businesses like Quest Diagnostics that provides free service to us. So a real effort in Connecticut to provide service for people in Connecticut. We operate these model clinics in part to serve the local populations that they do, but also to help us develop best practices and new models of working that we can then share with this network of hospitals and clinics that we work with around the globe. Finally, just a note on Syria. As Ambassador Ford will no doubt attest in his remarks later, Syria is the greatest humanitarian crisis in our world today. AmeriCares is there too. To date, we have delivered more than $3.5 million in medical aid for Syrian people. We've provided emergency medicines to refugee camps in Jordan. We've filled requests for medicines critically needed in Syria, including intravenous fluids and treatments for wounds and infections. In August of last year, we received a special request for nerve gas antidote, which we were able to provide about 2,000 doses of it to partners in that part of the world. We've also provided $1.5 million worth of medicines to U.S. doctors, volunteer doctors, who were making medical trips to the region to work with refugees in that population. And our most recent shipment provided enough emergency medicine for a population of 30,000 people for 3 months, delivered to a partner in Turkey that's also serving Syrian refugees. We're proud of our work in Syria, dealing with people who are caught in the crisis of war. And as I mentioned, this is the heart of our work, saving lives and improving health for people in crisis. We're proud that we create healthier futures for people in more than 90 countries every year. And we're proud that we can help Mariella from the video, who will soon celebrate her 8th healthy birthday. And we're also proud to accept this Luminary Award on behalf of my board of directors, our staff, and our partners around the world. Thank you.
On behalf of everyone here, we want to welcome you both to Connecticut. They arrived after spending 20 years in Georgia. They arrived in January and were treated to one of our best winters ever. So it gets better after this, okay? It really does. And I have to say that AmeriCares to me has always been an extreme point of pride in Connecticut. Of all the good things that happen in this state, they have a reputation that's just beyond anyone's, and it's just wonderful. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote moderator this evening. Dr. Lori Esposito Murray holds the Distinguished National Security Chair at the U.S. Naval Academy. She is also President Emeritus of the World Affairs Councils of America and a former Assistant Director for Multilateral Affairs of the U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency of the State Department. Dr. Murray has also served as a consultant to the President's Commission on Weapons of Mass Destruction and U.S. intelligence capabilities established by President George W. Bush. And in her spare time, she's been a consultant to ABC News. So please welcome Dr. Lori Esposito Murray.
Come up together and I'll introduce you in the chairs. Well, thank you very much. It truly is my pleasure to be here tonight. I have been, I'm a native of Connecticut, and I'm well aware of the great work that the World Affairs Council of Connecticut does. But as President Emeritus of the World Affairs Councils of America, I'm also deeply indebted to your leadership and what they've done to help make the national network even stronger and better. Jay Bruns has been a member of the board with me for a very long time now. And I have to agree with Ed Stockton that you did find the gem under your nose, Megan Torrey. So it's a real privilege to be here tonight, and it's especially a privilege to be here with Ambassador Ford. As you know, Ambassador Ford retired from 30 years of a very distinguished career in the Foreign Service in February of this year. And the position that he retired from was our ambassador to Syria. What I'd really like to highlight about that is the time frame that he was there and why we're so lucky to have him here and why as a country we're so lucky to have him still advising on the Syrian issue. He actually went to Syria after the Arab Spring had started in Tunisia and Egypt, but before it had started in Syria, and he just left this February. And so he was there at the beginning and through the transition as it went from civil protests to a major conflagration and conflict with global potential to explode even further. And he also, for his service there, won the Profiles in Courage Award from the John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Award, which I think you will join me in congratulating him on that for his service. As a professor at the Naval Academy, I consider it one of my missions to make sure that our young officers in training understand and appreciate the role that our Foreign Service plays in our diplomacy and in serving our country. And Ambassador Ford really stands as an outsized model of that. several points in his career, he has actually been threatened with violence and force for his views, including in Syria, which I hope he'll share with us, where he's known globally as a very, very strong opponent of the violence of the Assad regime and proponent of the opposition to that regime. He served in Algeria. He's a Middle Eastern expert. He speaks several languages, including Arabic, and you can read even more of his background, which includes time in Iraq, building up civic society there as deputy ambassador. So it's a real honor to be with you tonight, Ambassador Ford.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be in Connecticut, and let me thank Jay and Megan for the kind invitation. It's my pleasure.
So in order to help us out in terms of understanding the sense of the audience, yesterday a unnamed top senior national security official in the US government said that Syria was the top national security issue facing us today. And so we thought we'd ask you just to raise your hand if you agree that Syria is the top national security issue facing us today. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, how about if I rephrase that question? Do you think Syria is a top national security issue compared to the missing Malaysian airliner? Okay, here we go. I still didn't get a whole room yet. Oh my goodness. So anyway, well, let's get going on this conversation. This is such a privilege. I'd like to start with the humanitarian crisis in Syria, and congratulations to AmeriCares and the fabulous work you do, and congratulations to you, Michael, for your leadership. The UN Special High Commissioner for Refugees recently was quoted as saying, and this is a really stunning quote, that the greatest tragedy facing us today, and probably in this century, is the humanitarian crisis in Syria. And he said that the suffering and the displacement that's happening in Syria right now is probably the worst in recent history, and again, the worst in this century. And so, Ambassador Ford, I'd like to ask you, what is the problem? Is it, we have AmeriCares spending $3.5 million in terms of getting medical supplies over. Are the supplies not there? Are the countries not donating? Is the problem not getting what's available to the people in need? 6 to 9 million people displaced out of a country of 22 million, 2.7 registered refugees. I'd just like to ask you what your assessment is of why this humanitarian crisis at this time when human security is such a critical issue on the international agenda, why we're facing such a severe crisis.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lori. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon recently said that what's happening in Syria is the worst humanitarian crisis since the genocide in Rwanda 20 years ago. And I think, to begin with, it's the scale of the problem. Syria, as recently as 3 years ago, was a successful, reasonably prosperous country of 23 million. Now more than 9 million, that is to say more than a third of the population, has been displaced from their homes. And the reason is simple. There's a horrible war going on. And in particular, the Syrian regime has been very punishing, very, very brutal in its treatment of neighborhoods, of communities where opposition fighters are located. Michael just mentioned the need to ship in nerve agents or nerve gas antidotes. How many regimes in the last 15, even 20 years have used sarin gas on their own populations? Even Saddam Hussein, and I served 5 years in Iraq, Saddam Hussein never used chemical weapons on this scale. Now they're dropping chlorine bombs on people. So that's part of it, the brutality of the regime, which is basically trying to depopulate areas. What that in turn is doing as people flee their homes to get away from the regime's violence, they're either piling into communities that are safer inside Syria or they're going out of Syria into the neighboring countries and causing in particular problems in countries that are friendly to us, such as Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey.
And how serious is that destabilization on the humanitarian side with the refugees that, Lebanon's a very small country, 4 million, and facing about 1 million refugees?
Right. Lebanon, actually now about a quarter of the population inside the borders of Lebanon are Syrian refugees. So imagine if the United States had 85 million refugees. That's basically what Lebanon is confronting, with nothing like the resources that a country like the United States has. Jordan, King Abdullah, is very alarmed, and he's a very good friend of the United States, but he's very alarmed at the strain that approximately 1.2 million Syrian refugees in Jordan are putting on housing, on jobs, because now Jordanians are competing with desperate Syrian refugees for jobs. Jordan has a terrible water shortage. Its population has just surged by 1 million people approximately. Where will they get the water resources for that? And so in countries like Lebanon and countries like Jordan, it is particularly difficult.
And I should mention, too, in terms of AmeriCares, is not only contributing the aid that they're contributing in terms of medical supplies, and about 60% of the hospitals have been destroyed in Syria, but is also a partner on the With Syria effort in terms of the NGOs coming together and trying to raise the profile and the level of support for the humanitarian crisis taking place there. And so going to the conflict itself and President Assad, you were there at the beginning. Before in December, January, the protests started in March of 2011. And President Assad was looking at President Ben Ali in Tunisia, who protests started, he was gone within a month. He watched President Mubarak. Protests started in Egypt, he was gone within 18 days. President Assad stayed, and then, as you were saying, he fought back and has been fighting back now very brutally. What insights can you give us in terms of what you think his decision-making was on how he was going to handle this crisis? Do you think he went into it saying, I'm going to stick to this? What did he think his strengths were that he could withstand the pressure, whereas the other two presidents who were authoritarian dictators as well, one worse than the other, but still, ruled with iron hands?
I think Assad was very surprised by what has happened. I don't think he expected it. I met him just days before Hosni Mubarak in Egypt resigned. And of course I asked him, Mr. President, didn't turn out so well in Tunisia, and dictatorship there and dictatorship in Egypt, that didn't turn out real well. How are you feeling about Syria these days, Mr. President? I did it in a way like Leslie was describing, which is to say I said it in a long period without saying very much, but Assad got the message. And he said, it's not going to happen here, don't bet on it. And literally weeks after that, it started. And I think Assad himself, frankly, does not understand why Syrians were so angry at his regime. The demand that we heard constantly from opposition figures back in 2011 was people want to be treated with dignity. They were tired of corruption, having to pay for a driver's license. And when I say pay, I mean not the scheduled fee, but like 10 times the scheduled fee. To pay for a business license. And I don't mean the scheduled fee for a business license. I mean like 10 times the scheduled fee for a business license. Or having to pay to have the teacher do the grades for your child in high school so that they could apply to college. The corruption drove them crazy. The brutality of the regime infuriated them. Police brutality was on an epic scale in Syria. And I don't think Assad understood any of that. He lives in something of a bubble, frankly.
That's very interesting, especially since he was if you were looking at the three leaders, he was the least likely having, in terms of projecting brutality, since he had actually not anticipated really ever leading his country.
Well, he studied ophthalmology in Great Britain. He's an eye doctor. And his wife is a Syrian British woman who used to work actually for Citibank in London. And so they project an image of being very sophisticated. But when I was preparing to go to Syria and I was trying to read in about what was going on there and how it worked, I asked my boss at the State Department, the Assistant Secretary, I said, well, what books would you recommend? And he waved me off and he said, oh, you don't need to read a book. Just watch The Sopranos for a couple of episodes and you'll get a real good understanding of how it works there.
Well, in terms of, it was interesting in this February, DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, actually testified to the Senate that a major turning point, so Assad was basically going on a decline in terms of the opposition and the conflict. And he highlighted the President Obama's effort, first after, he highlighted the effort of the Chemical Weapons Convention as being a turning point in terms of having an impact on having him become much stronger and his regime becoming much more legitimate. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that? And do you think that effort, how do you see the whole play out of the red line and then the effort on the Chemical Weapons Convention in terms of how it affected the conflict?
Well, I think when the president said it was a red line and the regime then very clearly used sarin gas on a massive scale in 4 different neighborhoods around Damascus on August 21st, I think everyone in the region and frankly many countries around the world, François Hollande, the president of France, for example, expected the United States to lead an international military effort to at least use military force to deter the regime from using chemical weapons again. And when the president decided to use diplomacy and have John Kerry negotiate something with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in Geneva, and I was there for those discussions, I think there was a real shock. And countries in the region, in particular our friends like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, were bitterly disappointed that the American Air Force didn't appear suddenly. But from our perspective, we were able to rid Syria of about 90% of the chemical agents and of most of the production facilities, so that it was a real achievement. But it's an incomplete achievement. The regime still controls some production facilities. They're not supposed to, but they do. And now they are using chlorine gas. And did anyone see what the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations said about chlorine gas the week before last in the United Nations? He said, chlorine is not dangerous. Chlorine is what you disinfect swimming pools and bleach your laundry with, as if countries like Britain, France, the United States have no experience with chlorine gas in combat situations. It really was a shocking remark.
And chlorine gas is what was used in World War I that actually led to the ban on chemical weapons globally, the norm, and then years later led to the actual Chemical Weapons Convention with the verification provisions that were included with that.
Right.
So now on the opposition side, and I know, the American public, myself, if you could help lend some insights into understanding the opposition, the factions. I mean, we're dealing with, we constantly hear about Al-Qaeda factions, and then Al-Qaeda has a meeting and they decided that they're only in favor of one faction and not the other. If you could break down what's happening with the opposition and then lend some insights, since this was the effort you were very much engaged in terms of how do we decide as a country, how did we make the determinations about which opposition factions to support?
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of factions, and you really do sort of need a scorecard, not so different if you're, I'm in Red Sox Nation territory up here, and I'm a Baltimore Orioles fan, but I actually think if you're trying to follow the entire American League, you don't need to know every player on the 25-man starting teams for each team. What you do need to know are the different teams. It's divided, Lori, but it's not that divided. There are just several large clumps of opposition figures. The one that is the problem is the Al-Qaeda faction, which is important in the opposition. It's big. It probably represents, I'm going to roughly estimate, 25% of the fighters, people who are carrying guns and using them against Bashar al-Assad. The other 75% actually are fighting a two-front war now. They're fighting against al-Qaeda, which is good for us, and they're also fighting against Bashar al-Assad, back to what I said about dignity and getting rid of a brutal regime, etc. They're fighting a two-front war, and we have been working to get more support into those people who are fighting both al-Qaeda and the regime.
And we just gave diplomatic recognition to the Syrian opposition this week.
Not full diplomatic recognition. A lot of this is a game of inches. Now I'm mixing to football metaphors, but we have gone up a notch in terms of the manner in which we will work with, if you want to call it this, a bigger coalition of opposition factions together, sort of the American League of the Syrian opposition.
And so
they do
have
need
been,
a designated hitter
yes.
rule, though.
And they have come, they came to the United States this week. They met in Washington yesterday. And we are giving them the TOW anti-tank missiles. And they've come asking for the anti-aircraft missiles, more lethal aid, particularly after to be able to shoot down aircraft. Major concern to us that we don't want to be disseminating that type of technology, particularly in this type of conflict. Do you think we should be doing more? And one of the major criticisms in Washington, Senator McCain, I worked on the McCain campaign, that was just a slip. Senator McCain's biggest criticism of the Obama administration, it was too little, too late. Should we be doing more now? And do you think part of the reason why this conflict has spun out of control in terms of growing from an internal conflict to a regional and potentially global conflict is because we did too little, too late? And should we be doing more?
I think we have to do more. Not many people raised their hands when they said Syria was the most important problem we have in the world right now. The head of the FBI, the head of the Directorate of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, and the Secretary of Homeland Security, all in the last 3 months, have told Congress that the problem of fighters going into Syria and joining al-Qaeda to fight against the Assad regime and then using American or British or some other European passport to come back into this country and to carry out terrorist acts is one of their major preoccupations now. That is to say, there is a growing concern in Washington that the Syrian conflict is actually going to reach out and touch us directly in this country at some point. And so we do have an interest in, A, fighting al-Qaeda on the ground there. Does that mean we have to send in American forces? No. I think indigenous forces, local forces, who already are fighting al-Qaeda, we should be helping them. And I mentioned that there are groups that are actually doing this now. And they're actually having success on the ground. They have kicked al-Qaeda out of a number of cities and provinces in Syria and sort of are starting to squeeze them and contain them. That needs to continue. But that doesn't solve the conflict. That could go on a long time, and you always have the risk of spillage or drainage or infiltration from groups there. Problem of Afghanistan before 9/11 all over again. And that is a major risk in Syria. So we still need to end the conflict in some way. And that, because of the stalemate on the ground between the opposition and Bashar, because of that stalemate, we'll have to get to a negotiation. We tried very hard to launch a negotiation during the winter in January and February. Secretary Kerry led that effort. I was there.
You were key in putting that together.
It was stillborn. The regime, Bashar al-Assad, said he absolutely would not discuss any changes in government, would not discuss it. And so the talks immediately broke down. I think we will still have to try to get the regime to go to the table and negotiate. It's not for the United States to negotiate it. This is not our country. It's not ultimately our problem. But it could reach us. It could touch us. And so we need to get the negotiations going, and we need them eventually between Syrians to succeed. And if it takes more pressure on Assad on the ground to get him to agree to go to the table, then we will have to increase that pressure.
And another pressure point is obviously Russia. And here again, the decision in terms of the chemical weapons and the Chemical Weapons Convention was not only seen as legitimizing Assad, but it was also the first time that President Putin was back on the global scene, playing a major role when we've seen where that's taken us as he's continued on that path. How do you think, what are the key elements in terms of trying to convince Russia that it's in their interest to help resolve this through a negotiation?
I think Syria is Russia's last friend in the Middle East. During, a period of 40 years, Russia, and before it the Soviet Union, had a variety of friends in the Middle East that included Libya, that included Syria, that included Iraq, that included Yemen. And all of those friends now are gone, except Bashar al-Assad and Syria. They're the last ones. And I think Putin does not want to see his friend, or at least the friendly government in Syria, removed for something new that he doesn't know what it's going to be. Where we have talked to the Russians, and I've been in innumerable conversations with Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov, is both we and the Russians have a combined interest in seeing that Al-Qaeda presence, those 7, 10, 12,000 extremist fighters, see them contained and eventually eliminated. Al-Qaeda-related fighters conducted numerous terrorist acts inside Russia. They blew up the Russian metro. They made a mess in places like Grozny. They killed thousands of people. The Russians don't want to go through that again. And there are plenty of Al-Qaeda-related fighters from the Caucasus area of Russia, the Chechens, who are in Syria right now. And they're very visible. You can YouTube tonight when you go home. Chechen fighters, YouTube, you'll see them. The Russians are afraid of those people and they want them eliminated. We do too. We also are threatened by people like that. So the question is, can we and the Russians find a way to achieve a mutual security need by finding a solution, a negotiated solution to the Syrian conflict? Very frankly, Lori, we failed to do that in Geneva. The Russians were unwilling to put enough pressure on Bashar al-Assad to get him to negotiate a new political system, a new political government.
So what do you think the Ukraine effect is? Does it make that worse in terms of Putin's steadfastness, or does it actually help?
Yeah, they asked me that yesterday on WNPR, same question. The Syria crisis predates Ukraine by several years. When it started in 2011, we weren't talking about this kind of a problem in Ukraine. In 2012 and in 2013. The Syria crisis now is well into its 4th year. And so all I can say is I view Ukraine as more a reflection of what happened in Syria, which is to say that when the White House, when the president promised stern measures against the Russians if it continued, I cannot help but think that Vladimir Putin recalled the red line threat from the president in August and said, well, how tough can they really be? I think Ukraine is a different situation from Syria, and the American reaction to what's going to happen or what is happening in Ukraine will necessarily be different from what it is in Syria. There are different interests, there are different players involved. But I suspect that Vladimir Putin is not impressed so far with the amount of pressure we have put on Russia and Bashar al-Assad, and therefore he is not so afraid in Ukraine. Although today there are some positive signs for the first time, touch wood.
Yeah. And in terms of other winners in this conflict, if there could be other winners, Iran and Iran's hegemonic role in the region, that seems to be strengthening due to this conflict.
Yes.
And puts them in a pivotal position as well in terms of finding a solution.
Even perhaps more than the Russians, Iran is giving huge help to Bashar al-Assad. They've organized fighters to go in. You know, Assad's control of the population is only about 15% of the population. Roughly 70% of the population is against Assad. And so he has a real manpower shortage in a war of attrition. You usually wouldn't bet on a small minority to win a war of attrition. So the Iranians have been sending in fighters. People that we were fighting against in Baghdad in 2006, 7, and 8, 9. Iraqi Shia mobilized with Iran, fighting against our soldiers in places like Baghdad and Basra. Those same Iraqi fighters, organized by Iran, are now in Syria fighting for Bashar al-Assad. Hezbollah, who we know very well, they've killed Americans on things like the hijacked TWA flight in the late 1980s. And of course, they have fought several wars against Israel. Hezbollah has gone into Syria in a very big way, thousands of soldiers. And the Iranians have actually sent their own uniformed personnel to go fight in the war as well. They are the only country that has sent uniformed personnel formally to go fight in Syria. And they are strengthening their position. They're strengthening their influence in Damascus. And if they prevail, they will represent a bigger threat, not only to us, but also, frankly, to Israel and to our other friends in the region, including the Lebanese government, the Jordanian government. And so it's a big concern. This is why Saudi Arabia and Turkey are fighting so hard back against Iran.
And in terms of our relationship with Iran and the nuclear talks going on, there's been a very strong effort on the part of the United States to actually keep the nuclear talks about the nuclear talks. Do you think that's the right strategy?
I'm a realist. Iran has people on the ground fighting, and they're sending in money, they're sending in weapons, and I don't think we can get a deal in Syria without Iran. And so at some point, sooner is probably better than later, we will have to open some kind of a channel with Iran to figure out, just as we've tried to do with Russia, are there some kind of a common set of interests that we could all agree on as the basis for a solution to this grinding Syrian conflict?
So we've talked about Russia, we've talked about, and its relationship with Syria, we've talked about the Shia-Sunni issue and Iran's role, and now the Sunni-Sunni issue, where Saudi Arabia and the UAE are actually at loggerheads with the Qataris on which factions to support. It seems like whatever layer you go to here, there's a complexity.
Yeah. I used to think nothing could be more complicated than Iraq when I was over there, but Syria wins hands down. In the end, if you boil it down to its essence, Lori, there has been for the last 1,500 years a bitter conflict between the two halves of the Islamic world, the Sunni based out of Saudi Arabia basically, and Shia based basically out of Persia, Iran. That long fight boiled over, we saw it in Iraq. The American military was in the middle of it. Now it is in Syria, and it has both a civil war aspect in Syria, Shia Alawis fighting Sunnis, but then backed up by partners, Saudi Arabia and Turkey for the Sunnis inside Syria, Iran and Hezbollah and Iraqi Shia to help the regime. And so Syria has gone from a peaceful protest movement, and I actually witnessed peaceful protests. I actually went and talked to protesters and urged that they avoid violence. That became harder and harder for them as the regime became more and more brutal, more arrests, more extrajudicial killings. Then it devolved into a civil war, and now still is a civil war, but has taken on an angle of a regional war. And so to put that all back in a box, I think we have to address the regional angle. We must discuss with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with Turkey, with Russia, what would be the basis for finding a solution, and at the same time deal with the civil war, which means getting Syrians to talk to other Syrians. And it's a devilishly tricky operation.
And so projection on timeline in terms of endgame.
I have none. I've been speaking to groups. I was in California last week, and I'm not prepared to be any more optimistic now, a week after I spoke in California last week. This will grind on for a while. It means that there are going to be more refugees. It means that there are going to be more pleas from the United Nations for the United States to provide more help. The United Nations for refugees thinks it needs $6.5 billion with a B dollars this year, calendar year 2014. So far, they have received only $1.5 billion. So they are getting only about a quarter of what they need. And they're going to be coming back to us and saying, if you don't want to watch on TV starving children, you, the Americans, you, the Europeans, you, Arab countries, are going to have to pay a lot more money. So that's one problem. And then the second is this incipient terror threat that the FBI, that Homeland Security, that the Director of National Intelligence is talking about. And so we do have an interest in finding a way forward to solve this, but I cannot say it's going to be fast, and I certainly cannot say it's going to be easy.
So last question to all of you. At the end of this discussion, how many of you think Syria is a top national security issue facing us? Well, join me in thanking Ambassador Ford. That was really very... Thank you so much. What an incredible opportunity.
Thanks, Fran.
Just stay on the stage for Megan wants to come up. Okay.
Thank you. That was really excellent.
That was a
Really appreciate it.
fascinating conversation. And Mr. Ambassador, I really want to salute you for not only your service to our country, but your courage in
Thanks.
doing that.
Sometimes it wasn't courage, it was just foolishness.
That's the better part of courage.
So we couldn't let you leave Harvard without giving you a few reminders of us. So courtesy of the Harvard Business Journal, we have some Harvard books for you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excellent.
We have some World Affairs Council mementos. And knowing that you are from Baltimore, in walking distance of Camden Yards, I have a very nice gift for you.
I do not think the Orioles Nation will recognize diplomatic immunity if I wear that to Camden Yards. Thank you very much, Megan.
Thank you, Megan. Well, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, both of you. Well, it's been another wonderful evening for the World Affairs Council, another stimulating discussion. And it's wonderful to celebrate our 90th anniversary in this way. And the World Affairs Council continues to promote greater understanding of the world. As we know, understanding global affairs is really essential to navigating today's world, because today, local issues and international issues are more connected than ever. The World Affairs Council of Connecticut is the only institution in the greater Hartford area dedicated to this mission. For more information, if any of you would like to become a member or a sponsor, please pick up a brochure as you leave the ballroom this evening. And thank you all for joining us here tonight. It's been wonderful to see you, and thank you for making this annual event so great with your generous support. Good night.